Recording in progress.
In a few seconds, I'm gonna share it on LinkedIn as well. Daniela, you can kick off.
Cool. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Daniela Drori. I'm a solutions engineer here at OX. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a few industry experts here. We have Cam, we have Sean, we have Ron, and we have Jack with us. And in a few minutes, I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start the webinar with a brief introduction. Each panelist will have a chance to present himself, and then we'll get into a deeper discussion about our topic of the webinar, which is decoding AppSec reporting. We want to understand together how we can move from metrics and different alerts that different application security tools alert us with to some more meaningful insights. As usual, we are a question-friendly webinar, so in case you have any question, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we will make sure to address it during our discussion. As I said, my name is Daniela. I'm a solutions engineer here at OX, and I will let Cam introduce himself first.
Thank you, Daniela. Hi, my name is Cam Kamalesh. I'm the Director of Security Engineering and Operations at Mambu. Part of my responsibilities also involve dealing with AppSec in addition to InfoSec and SecOps. And previous to Mambu, I was with Miro as the head of corporate security. And before that, I was with cybersecurity vendors, basically helping customers navigate their challenges and drive adoption for cybersecurity vendors like Palo Alto, Cisco, and Juniper. That being said, I do oppose to the characterization of Daniela as an expert. I know enough to hurt myself. I'm not entirely sure if I know enough to help myself, so bear with me. But it's great to meet all of you.
I hope at least you can help others that are here with us.
I will certainly try.
This would be good enough for us. Sean, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Great.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Ron.
So, no, please. I misheard.
Sean, you got it right. I actually said Sean. Ron, you'll be next.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. Great to be joined with everyone else. Great bunch of people on. So a bit about myself. I started off as a developer and spent numerous years in development, and then I moved over to security. And I've been in AppSec for a good few number of years now, more than I'm willing to probably share. At the moment, I'm head of application security at a company called Featurespace, which is software that deals with helps prevent financial fraud. I always got to say that properly. Don't want to say software that works with financial fraud. It helps combat financial fraud. And before that, I was at a company called Immersive Labs, and before that, SecureWorks. So I'm quite active in the community, enjoy helping out other people and trying to share guidance and advice where I can.
Cool. So Sean, to be honest, we have a very similar introduction because I also started as a as a developer, and then I moved to cybersecurity. And I always say that I'm here more years than I care to admit. But yeah,
Awesome.
Ron, you're up next.
Thank you, Daniela. My name is Ron. I work as an information security officer in the application or product development space. So my daily work is support teams to mature their development or secure development processes. From my background, I started in business informatics, so more like the interface between IT and business processes, and then ventured off into compliance and auditing before I then took a turn back into IT. And I think, I don't know, 10 years ago, application security hit me, and then it was a slippery slope downwards into development security and data privacy, and these parts made my respective certificates for for different reasons. And yeah, well then, like focused last 4 years, 4 years mainly on development security.
Cool. We are happy with whichever reasons brought you here to be with us. And Jack, you're the last one.
Yeah, good to be here. Welcome everybody. So my name is Jack Krul. I'm the CISO or Group Information Officer of AppSec Group, and we build business software, mainly financial and HR kind of software. So a lot of data and a lot of different products. So I'm responsible for the policies, but also the monitoring and the controls within also in the development phases of all those products and the cloud infrastructure where we host them, mainly public cloud for our customers, mainly in the Benelux and the DACH region.
So your applications are not just like they're like different applications per different customers, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, we have a few crown jewels, very big applications, but we also do acquisitions, so smaller applications which are hosted also on AWS or Azure. So we have a portfolio of products.
Cool. So thank you all for sharing. If we're diving into the topic of our webinar today, we know that effective reporting is essential to reducing risk, to aligning security and business needs, and enabling teams to take action in the most efficient way. We want to make sure that the organization we work in is not facing any breaches. We want to make sure we increase the productivity as much as possible. And in this session, we'll try to explore the different strategies for overcoming the different reporting challenges that we might be facing when having even just one tool that alerts on many issues, or of course many tools that alerts on a lot of vulnerabilities. And we're gonna have 3 topics that we're gonna touch, 3 subtopics, I guess you can say, that we're gonna touch today. The first one is why decoding is necessary. We want to understand why we cannot just go by whatever the tool is alerting us. The second one would be the different risks and challenges in decoding the reports and the alerts that the tools represents to us. And the third one is the different solutions and approaches. So I guess we can start off with the first one. And Cam, I think let's start with the most basic question, that is the subtopic itself. Why is it even important to do some kind of digestion and like decode and contextualize on all the information around the vulnerabilities that we get from the different tools when it comes to risk assessment and reporting?
Well, and that's a great question. So, see, here's the thing, right? When we talk about vulnerabilities, one of the things that we have to understand is that, especially by the way in which vulnerabilities are scored, if we're talking about a CVSS score, there are different parameters that are taken into account, and there are different vectors that are assumed when they are actually being scored. Now, one of the things that I've seen people think about is that when we talk about risks versus vulnerabilities as such, we have to contextualize the severity of the vulnerability, because not every, even if you have that specific library, even if you have that specific system within your estate, it's not always a guarantee that that particular set of vectors against which the CVSS was scored is actually what is relevant to your organization, to your infrastructure, which means that when we are doing a risk assessment, and I would definitely, I would definitely take a risk-based approach in terms of vulnerabilities. There are 4 different reasons for why that is the case. But when we are doing the risk assessment, it is very important to take these factors into consideration, because one of the things that we have to really watch out for is basically a very common term in security operations, the alert fatigue. If you look at a RSS feed of the CVSS vulnerabilities, it's a never-ending feed. It just keep going. There are so many vulnerabilities that are being reported, and the reality is that we do have to have a filtration mechanism to make sure that we are focusing on the right vulnerabilities, right? And that is the important aspect where you bring in the contextual information. You actually look at it from a critical standpoint, saying, okay, hey, why is this vulnerability important to be fixed? What is the right prioritization for this? So, NVD might say that this is a critical vulnerability, but is this actually critical for my business? And that level of filtration is absolutely necessary because prioritization is very, very essential. I mean, I'm sure my peers in the security team would not disagree with me when I say that developers have a limited bandwidth, right? I mean, they're constantly bogged down by business outcomes, and as a result, while they are very much willing to fix vulnerabilities, prioritization becomes a very, very key factor for them to focus on what is actually effective and what is necessary, and try to create that level of traction with them that helps us improve security posture at the end of the day, because that's the ultimate goal. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it brings up an interesting point because we see more and more, I mean, us as an application security vendor ourselves, we're trying to understand what are those different metrics that the application security teams or the developers later on need to evaluate, besides all the global metrics like CVSS score, whether or not this is exploitable. And right now, this is something that the security team or the developers have to do manually, but we also see a trend of application security or ASPM vendors that are trying to automate this. But I definitely understand what you're saying, that this is still in many use cases something that must be done either automatically or manually by the teams themselves in order to make sure we don't just look at global metrics like CVSS score, but we tackle it per use case. And I think maybe it's also important to ask, like, what are the most common mistakes that you see that the teams or developers are doing when they are trying to do this, let's say, triaging or prioritization of the reporting security issues. So, John, do you want to maybe take this question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think it's important when we realize what security is about, right? At the end of the day, about managing risk. That's the way I always view security. In its simplest form, managing risk. While we aim to get rid of risk, that's never going to happen. Business needs to be forward. I mean, I have the most secure system ever. It's going to be a rock that does absolutely nothing and no value to anyone. It's 100% secure. Even then, you maybe question whether it's 100% secure, but you kind of get what I'm saying. It's meaningless. It's valueless. On the flip side, we can put all the bells and whistles and have no security, but all the features, and that's also not right. So it's about balancing it. And I think one of the challenges that we see companies get in, and sometimes security professionals as well, is they don't take the view of their own context into their scope. To Cam's point, put really well. A vulnerability may have a CVSS 10, but as Cam pointed out, like, you may not use that function, or you may have it firewalled off so deeply that it's totally pointless. And to view it as that CVSS 10, it might just drop down to low or something. And while we're talking about this, and this is why it's really important to me, is that word risk. Now, when people go view vulnerabilities, they immediately jump to CVSS. Now, I like CVSS. There's a bit of contention there, but I think it's used incorrectly for larger parts. And actually, if you go to NIST's website and under the vuln metrics, it clearly states that CVSS is not a measure of risk. But what do? We use it as a measure of risk. So what we need to do is change the way we deal with this. So if you look back in the history of some of the vulnerabilities that came out, like Heartbleed, that wasn't a CVSS 10, that was like CVSS 5 or something like that. But that was a big thing. Log4j, where everyone lost the marbles and the end's forwarding on that, when in reality, if you actually took it and worked out what the real risk was, yes, the impact was high, but the likelihood was low. So coming back to the reporting, I think we need to add those contexts or take the context into when we're dealing with the reports. Don't just look at the CVSS score. How likely is it to be exploited? What other things do we have in place to help prevent the impact? And on top of that, while we're dealing with all of that, we also need to have things in place to guide development teams on how to remediate it. Too often I see security teams, yeah, this problem, go fix it. Well, okay, how do we fix it? Or not providing the guidance and they come back. I've also had development teams go, yeah, we fixed it. How do you know you fixed it if you're asking me to test it? So we've got to work with development teams. And one way is effectively is in the reporting, have the right information for development teams to understand how to fix it, how to test it, so on and so forth.
So I think you made two very interesting observations here. The first one, well, the Log4j example, I think is I think the most representing one because everyone was so hysterical about it. And I see even now articles being released recently about how when we're talking about like very in-depth transitive dependencies that are not even direct dependencies, the likelihood or the potential of this actually being exploited reduces drastically to less than 1% likelihood of a vulnerability in a Log4j transitive dependency being actually exploitable by an attacker. So I think this is also one of the metrics. Okay, we have the CVSS score, but another factor to take under consideration is this something that is actually attacker is able, or what are the likelihood of him being able to exploit one of my second or third transitive dependency, like in the depth of the tree, I mean. And the second thing that you mentioned about like helping the developers understand how to fix vulnerabilities, I feel like everyone were talking about shifting left up until a few years ago in the application security world, but of course, this is something that is important. We want to stop vulnerabilities as soon as possible, but in a lot of cases, you see that developers are not sure, okay, we need to upgrade from this dependency to that dependency. It doesn't really say a lot to me as a developer in terms of what other adaptation I need to do in order to really make the fix and not break the application. And I think this is also something that we need to take under consideration when prioritizing, not just the risk, but also, is this a major fix that we have to implement right now? Is this a major version jump that is going to affect the functionality? So it's not even from the vulnerability perspective, but also something that I believe we should be taking under consideration to understand which vulnerabilities should be prioritized first. So thank you. I'm moving on to my next question. We see it in a lot of cases. I mean, me, when I work with potential customers, we see that we meet a lot of customers that have more than one scanner for sure for application security, and sometimes even two scanners that might do the same thing, or like it's a very confusing word because there are so many scanners out there. And I guess my question here is, how can you tell if you have too many scanners? How do you verify if you have the right ones, or if you have a one that even worth it, especially taking under consideration when there are so many open source scanners out there? Ron, do you want to maybe take this question?
Yes, thank you. Well, the question is about what, first of all, about what scanners do we talk? I mean, we have all the ones that are reactive, like all the intrusion detection and so on. That's a whole world out there now with extended intrusion detection, the classics. And then we have the ones that I mainly focus on is basically everything when we talk about producing software. And there, I think we have to separate what the different functionalities are in the first place. Like, of course, you have something for static analysis. You want to look what your composition is. You now blend more and more into scenarios where you have the operating structures in there, like all the container posture management, or everything that happens then in production, which is not necessarily like intrusion detection. So I think you should certainly cover the whole length, yeah, to come from coding, from third-party code, from everything that then happens in containers, which was in the past basically vulnerability management on virtual machines, yeah, so very far away from development. But then the question is how many you have per per different section. And I think that gets more and more difficult because in the past, you had very specialized providers that say, okay, they were providing one single functionality, and now many are moving more and more into platform security, which I think in general is good, but it leads to that overlap that you mentioned. Yeah, so there are certain things that you have more scanners for one topic. I in the past have seen the part that not necessarily all functionality is covered by some vendors. So there has been often the need to go for multiple vendors, especially then when you take the whole length from static to then Kubernetes and cloud and what else. And then you have the second part, how do you deal then with the overlap? So then you have to see, okay, you have to prioritize, you have to decide. And for many, in my experience, we decided on basically a primary target and something that is corroborating then the information. Yeah? So based on the quality that we perceived, and then when we but that brings the question then, how many corroborative information do you want? Like say if you one major one and then you have the second opinion, third opinion, fourth opinion. It's basically stuck on your risk appetite. So if I see like like if you very have a software that has a high risk, or like you're maybe in the area producing IAM systems, so browsers, say you certainly want to increase that to a larger extent than if you're producing software, everyday software that has not that security impact. And that's basic from the industry or from the product perspective. When it comes to the actual teams, it depends on how much can you handle. So the moment you realize that you have findings that you constantly ignore, yet you never react to it. Basically, you just never look to. You should certainly consider reducing that. Although that becomes a bit more of a a problematic thing with the recent legislation as well, because you're supposed to provide things without vulnerabilities. And the question is, how much do you have to invest in there to figure out that they are free of them? So it's a two-bladed sword, a little bit, like ignoring things that you could have, and on the other hand, then saying, okay, if I use it, then I will not, and I will not react to it. Then it just lowers my overall ability to react to specific findings. And you mentioned then a lot of things. What is with open source? I mean, if you have nothing, then you should certainly at least think about open source solutions that you have, because they are there to implement. This costs some work, but it's certainly you should not have nothing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Then it's better to have nothing. But I mean, it's an interesting approach, because I think the first time I've heard someone speaking about, okay, I want to have as many tools as possible, even if they are paid tools, because each tool has its own specific area where this shines. It can be a specific language that they have an amazing coverage for. It can be a specific scan category like DAST or SAST or code smells that they are amazing at, and this was their crown jewel product, and so on. But I think eventually we're getting back to the topic that, like, okay, we have those tools. And then I remember myself asking the first person I had a chance to speak about this approach with, and I asked him, okay, how many of those are you actually fixing on a day-to-day basis? And he's like, not a lot, not as much as we would like. So I think it's very important to, first of all, understand if we're actually taking the maximum potential or leveraging the maximum potential of a first tool that we have before we move on to another one.
Exactly. It's not that you should have the most as possible. I mean, it depends on your scenario. There are certain companies that I've met that have a lower risk tolerance, and they say we invest in people and work on those findings. Yeah? So that's not this one solution fits all. But you're absolutely right. You should have one major tool that you work with, and it's a point when you cannot fix anymore. Then the additional information does not necessarily help.
Yeah.
What I see there sometimes is that it's not really that you have additional vulnerabilities, but sometimes that you have more corroborating information on it. So like enrich the existing information and maybe add certain elements that another tool might not provide, or where you have maybe a specific compliance obligation that you have to provide a specific kind of reporting or so on, and then it gets a bit messier.
Yeah, I agree. Some tools might have the same face value, like they can both be SaaS scanners, but one of them can integrate, for example, with our pen test results, and the other one can interact with our cloud environment and like bring different aspects into here. I think this takes us back to like the prioritization mechanism, because like the more integration points we have, like pen test results or dust connectors or a cloud environment, this really helps us to prioritize more and more issues. And Jack, do you want to share a bit more about what are the methods that you use to make sure that your prioritization of vulnerabilities is as accurate as possible?
Yeah, interesting question. Love to. No, so what we do is it's a little bit combination of what my predecessors said. So it's mainly about scan and verify. So what we do with most of the vulnerabilities, especially also with Log4j and also with infrastructure vulnerabilities, is have our tooling to verify if the vulnerability is really there. Because if whatever vulnerability pops up, and most of the vulnerabilities that have cool logos or cool names, like Sean said, the Heartbleed had a cool logo, a cool name, so the entire world was running. But you have to verify if you really have implemented the piece of software or the third-party component in a way that attackers can maybe use to their advantage. So we scan a lot. Yes, we scan all our products. We also conduct all kinds of manual tests, like pen testing, those kind of things. But we always verify if all the results that pop up are really there, and then we classify most of the findings. This is a vulnerability that can cause a system to go down, like a small DDoS, or is this really a remote code execution? And we check certain vulnerabilities. If it's only you can hurt the application by making it go offline, and it's not our crown jewel, and it costs 2 years to fix the vulnerability. Can we fix it in a different way? Can we not use obfuscation or something else to make the vulnerability not visible or not even available from the outside? So we are not always in the game of fixing all the vulnerabilities. I think that's a fantasy that any company can fix all their vulnerabilities in the application security. I think you should really check your vulnerabilities, see what vulnerabilities need to be patched ASAP, which vulnerabilities can wait a few weeks, and which vulnerabilities you should take offline, or you remove a piece of functionality. So we also took the liberty to remove certain functions from our software, because the functions were only used by a handful of customers on a total population of millions, and it was something generative. It was vulnerable, and so we said, okay, well, let's remove this piece of function, because it is the business case to fix this vulnerability is so hard. So let's remove this third-party component what we were using. That's also a risk. What Sean said about third-party or Cam said about third-party components. Sometimes there's only one guy or one woman building a piece of software, put it open source on the internet, never do updates, and commercial companies use those components, and then, okay, but there's a vulnerability in this software. Who's going to update it? And nobody's responsible. So then you have to make a choice. Can you find something else that replaces this component? Or do you remove the component and the function entirely from your software? And that's the way we do business. We try to classify and prioritize vulnerabilities and try to fix within certain boundaries the criticals, and then move away down to the lows. And certain lows, just wait on a major product overhaul once per quarter. And some have to be patched as a patch. And that's how we try to be safe.
And I think maybe another interesting question that comes to my mind, because especially you, that you're a B2B company, it's not that you're developing a software like Waze, for example, just throwing an example that everyone is familiar with. Do you take under consideration also how big is the customer that is currently using this application?
No, most of our applications are SaaS, so one platform for hundreds of thousands of customers. So we're not prioritizing. We are prioritizing on the amount of customers that are on a platform and the data that's in the application, because we also have applications with less users, but with very sensitive HR and medical data. That under the GDPR has significant amount of protection, and you classify your applications as crown jewel or not, and it prioritizes also how you tackle applications.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, this is like still leveraging business needs and tie them up with like the prioritization mechanism for vulnerability.
If we could spin up 1,000 employees that can patch, then we would do that. But employees are scarce, especially in application security, really understanding vulnerabilities and patching them. So you need techniques by firewalls that do virtual patching. You need removing a function. So you cannot patch everything. So I really think that prioritization and, okay, which vulnerabilities are we going to mitigate, which vulnerabilities do we accept, and which vulnerabilities do we remove entirely by removing the functions, and it's every time a business decision. It's not my decision. I only tell the business, hey, we have a vulnerability, and I think this is the criticality of the vulnerability based on a certain thresholds. CVE is one, but also, okay, can it be exploited? How many scanners pick this up? How vulnerable are we? Is it behind authentication, whatever? And then we prioritize.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I think maybe we're getting to my favorite topic, which is, I think, a challenge for everyone that is dealing with security. Let's say we have the most amazing security team and the most amazing perfect tool that we can ever dreamed of. And we have the most perfect prioritization mechanism, and we know exactly what it is, the 5 top vulnerabilities that we need to fix. It's not a lot, but still we need to somehow get to the dev teams to understand the severity of the issue, and we need to understand how to ensure that they are actually fixing them. So I guess this is like a very big friction point for a lot of security teams. So Sean, do you mind sharing a little bit about how do you get your dev teams to understand the severity of some items that are being reported, or how do you get them to fix them?
Yeah. So I think one of the things is understand how dev teams work. Right? If you're just talking to your dev teams, you're probably not going to win. It's not just the dev teams that are responsible for determining what work they do. You also got to speak to your product teams, because they will then put in front of the dev teams the amount of work. So one of the things is working with the development teams, but also working with the product teams, who then lay out the upcoming work for those development teams. If you can get on the product team side, you'll have a wonderful journey, and you'll have all the vulnerabilities addressed in a relatively short time period. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that many people, or certainly security teams, forget, is just going to the dev teams and talking to them in the silo. You have to work with the product teams. And then similarly, both the development and product teams is make them aware of why is it important to fix. Not just go and fix it because you have to. It's a set of 10 one. What does it actually mean if that's not fixed? How does it affect the product? How does it affect the company? I know it's this whole cliche thing, security is everyone's responsibility, but showing them what it actually means to them personally on a personal level, they will then start understanding it and perhaps hopefully take more of a more of a interest in fixing those vulnerabilities and understanding why is it so important, and leverage things like real world examples. This is one of the reasons why I love real world examples, why I use the likes of Equifax, not because I hate the company in that. It's just a really good example to show the consequences of not doing something properly, not getting those fixes in, and what the end result could mean. Because hey, you're a developer. At the end of the day, you lose customers. It could be your job on the line because of redundancies and so forth. So it's really important on that, and also making sure that they are working on the things that really matter. I mean, we've talked about the things like risk and all those kinds of things. And as Jack said, you're not going to fix all the vulnerabilities. I've seen companies try and go out, so we're going to fix everything. That in itself is probably as dangerous as not fixing things, because you're spinning your wheels so much trying to fix everything that you're not focusing on the ones that really matter and the ones that are going to cause the most harm.
So I want to extend the questions that you were asking. How does this affect the product? How does this affect customers? And like, I think the strongest question that you can ask is how will this affect sales?
Yep.
I think this is the one thing that everyone can agree that you don't want to harm. And being like on the sales team myself, I see how much affect the different things that we ask for the development team to fix is crucial, and how those are getting prioritized. So if you thought having the product on your side is good, try having the sales team on your side. I can assure it will be even better. So I think maybe because lots of AppSec tools and ASPM tools out there have, for example, integrations with Jira. They have integrations with Azure boards, any ticketing system out there, or integration with Slack or Teams to send alerts. But eventually you sometimes can get also conflict messaging between different tools that you're using. For example, one tool can report a specific vulnerability as high and the other one can report it as low. So it's interesting to understand like your level of trust, or how you define this level of trust, and eventually how you handle those types of conflicts between different tools. Juan, do you want to take this one?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure really if you can handle it perfectly. I mean, you will have, as I said, certainly one major tool or one primary tool that you work with, and then you try to add in additional information. So that's normally the way we try to avoid real conflicts. But at the end, if you say, as also Jack said, it's something you have to take a decision of risk, like, is that something that you would work on? And this becomes even more difficult now when we look at certain obligations that we will run into. Yeah, so more and more of, especially when you're a product vendor. I understand when you're hosting, that's a bit different because you have more risk-based approaches. But when you are a product and you're selling a product, or the use says product with digital elements, which basically is everything software, you have to reduce the vulnerabilities, even all of them. Yeah. Well, basically that's kind of the discussion, how much that extends. So I'm not really sure if it in the future will be really a conflict, or more like a way to maybe eliminate the certain parts. So I rather see it as an opportunity to say, okay, if one tool doesn't find it, for example, that's the thing. Like you have to say this is not a vulnerability, the other one is it, says it is. Then you have a data point to find why it does not affect me. Yeah, so you can follow up on something. On the other hand, if you say you have multiple tools, and I think also Jack mentioned that, if you have all your tools scream this is a whatever, CVS 10 or so, then you say, okay, this is something I should definitely focus on. So initially it helps with the direct prioritization, and afterwards you can make use of it to identify things that you maybe should not look at because one tool is maybe overly broad. Yeah, like they have the main thing when in third-party products, is it the correct dependency? Is the dependency actually affected? How do you match it? Who do you believe? I mean, we already have a lot of apart from tools, already a lot of conflicting information. We have NVD, which we know is not always that perfect, and we have all the GitHub advisories, and we have the Googles and so on. So as long as we integrate that information in a good way, like not having to look into 15 different tools and say what do they say and how to make the comparison, but find some kind of consolidation and correlation layer, I think it can even help. And I mean that's a lot of the things where ASPM tools come in. They say you have something in static, but in dynamic testing we cannot find it anymore, yeah, because we cannot actually exploit that. And there it can rather be a doesn't have to be a curse, but can be a blessing.
So two things comes to my mind when you speak about this. First one, very important point, like to cross information with pen test results, with DAS tools and so on. And therefore, I know that also something that we are planning to do in OX is like to have those different types of integration points that will give you the ability to cross all this different information. And I see a lot of, like, I previously worked in Snake as well, and I feel like when I'm doing POCs with prospects, they always try to see, okay, what are the vulnerabilities that came up? What are the severity? And they're sometimes neglecting this part of understanding or looking into why each vulnerability got the severity that we assign to it. And I think having this elaborated in a very good way in the tools that you are using is something that is priceless. And I feel like a lot of AppSec engineers that I meet or security specialists that I meet are not putting enough emphasis on that when they are evaluating a new tool. So if there is a tip that I can share with the audience here is not just look on the face value of the vulnerabilities, but also try to see how easy it is for you with the tools that you are evaluating, how easy it is for you to understand why this severity has been assigned to this specific issue. And I think this opens the door to another discussion, like everything around ASPM. You know, it's being sold as a single pane of glass to view all of the security risks out there. And Jack, I see you already half smiling because you know the next question is for you. I want to hear your thoughts on everything around it. When it comes to the usage of ASPM tool, what risks do you see here and so on?
Yeah, the same with all the other buzzwords that came up the last few years. So I still don't believe that ASPM tools are mature enough to buy or to implement. So yes, we have discussions with a couple of suppliers that can give those kind of solutions, but really having your single pane of glass on information security or application security, yeah, I've not seen it yet. So yeah, most suppliers try to sell me the golden bullet of information security or an AppSec security. I just think that we as professionals should think and see, okay, what information do we really need, and then try to come up with a platform that can show us that data. Can it be named ASPM? Yes, it can, but the vendors also try to tell ASPM is function X, and then the next one comes with function Y. So I'm still a little bit struggling what ASPM really means. Do I think if it matures, it can give us a bit more information? Yeah, I currently connect all kinds of platforms and have the APIs and connect it to a dashboard, which gives me the information that I need. I can drill down. Can it be better? Yes, always. So currently, this is what I have and what I have to work with. And for the rest, I just do it with what was said before. Try to think, okay, a vulnerability is being reported from to Y. So is this really a vulnerability? Check and verify, and then work from there. And if we can really implement a golden bullet, a nice tool called ASPM or from any vendor that can replace a lot of my dashboarding and gives me direct commands to virtual patch or something, so or update my rules in my WAF. Yeah, that would be great. But the effective working of those tools, I'm a little bit maybe pessimistic, but let's see what the future brings. I think those tools need to mature as well, as most companies have to mature on application security.
So first of all, I'm doing my best not to take everything that you say personally. No, but I'm
This
kidding.
is my personal opinion.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's an interesting discussion, and I am interested to hear what you feel like. How do you see this lack of matureness being like? What do you think AppSec, ASPM vendors in general can do better?
I think make choices about integrations, and the integrations they support. They need to support it very well, because you see most of the ASPM support almost everything. And then if you really want to connect and get certain data, then yeah, this is a custom build. We have to specify this. And I also think that a ASPM should do something with virtual patching or update certain rules in firewalls or web application firewalls. Because then you have really that single command ship that you can say, okay, this is a vulnerability. I send a command to my web application firewall and I'm safe, and I can patch the next day, because I really think the world is getting worse. So vulnerability 0 days are popping up every few months, and every year there is a very severe one that shook the world. Log4j was 2 years ago. We had Citrix a few years ago. So every year you see in infrastructure and application security something popping up that, yeah, is derailing the entire world, and makes us work a lot harder. And if we have something of a tool that says, okay, yeah, we are using this component, or yes, we are vulnerable, but there is really also a IOC, a indicator of compromise, and this is the way you can mitigate it by sending just a command to a server disabling this function, and you can do all that in a spam. That will be the golden bullet of application security, because then you can not only see the vulnerabilities, but you can also act on it almost instantly. And I'm not talking about patching, but virtual patching or disabling certain functions. And that will be my ideal world of whatever.
So first of all, Jack, we are hiring a new product manager if you're interested in a no, I'm kidding, but like it is, I mean, we are hiring, but I think it's like a very interesting discussion. I know that like we are internally thinking about what most beneficial integration points that we can have in order to really get this one single pane of glass, as you said. But you know, I do agree that this is like a new term, everything around ASPM, and like a new industry product, let's say, in general, that has been invented in the past few years. And it's interesting to see like where will the future take us all in this case.
Yeah, most vulnerabilities are reported on Friday afternoon. So if we have something that can virtual patch for the weekend, and then we can start on Monday, that is what I'm searching for in certain tooling.
Well, we work Sunday till Thursday, so Friday afternoon we're already off. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. We're moving to the third subtopic for today, which is the solutions and approaches. And Cam, I would be interested in knowing what are some of your key approaches for security leaders what they can do to ensure that they have adequate levels of risk treatment that is applied to identify the different vulnerabilities in your applications.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have to understand is around what is the actual problem that we're trying to solve, right? So one of the problems that I foresee, especially in the prioritization part of it, is that there is a translation between, an a pseudo-objectively characterized vulnerability with a specific rating into, a risk. So, and while I do agree that, there are there are some objective ways of looking at risk. To a certain extent, risk assessment is an intuitive exercise. That it comes through years of experience and in properly understanding how that will potentially impact the organization. Now, one of the challenge that I do foresee is that especially when we talk about our analysts who are actually evaluating these vulnerabilities or receiving RSS feeds and then looking to report it out to the management. The biggest problem is that this particular translation, without an additional help in terms of contextualization, in terms of providing that single pane of glass where they can compare and correlate different sources of information and get a more accurate picture. Without this particular tooling, it's going to be difficult for them to actually make this translation from a vulnerability score to a risk score. And because ultimately, one of the things that we have to understand is that more often than not, when you're reporting out problems or when you're reporting out security issues to senior leadership executives, they understand risk. They don't understand CVSS scores, right? So as a result, this particular translation needs to happen right at the grassroots level. At this point, because there is so many different sources of information and very few correlation and a holistic view as such of what this particular threat entails, that part of it is relatively broken, and I think that is where one of the strategies that we could follow is, as you mentioned, having a single pane of glass, which actually gives analysts enough information for them to actually make this determination. The other aspect of it is also organizational because one of the other things that people haven't maybe discussed about is not just the increased prioritization, rather the reverse of it, in that sometimes because some issues are really difficult to fix. I've had developers, not in my current company, but I had developers in some of the former organizations say that, hey, this is too difficult to fix. Can you just lower the risk rating? So that way we don't have we are still within SLAs. And to be fair, I'm pretty sure the rest of the panelists would have had similar experiences as well, where you reach out to a developer and they say this is too difficult to fix. We'll need to backlog it, right? And that is an organizational problem in that, when we are talking about the accountability for fixing risks, it needs to be a shared accountability in the sense that there needs to be a part of accountability that needs to rest on the developers themselves. And so essentially, both from a technical standpoint, you do need a single pane of glass, you need correlation, you need good processes that actually digest the information that are coming in from different sources and actually provide it in a business literate way that is understood by the executive leadership. And the other part of it, where you do have the buy-in from engineering leadership to say, okay, hey, if this is genuinely a critical risk, we will adhere SLAs. There may be situations where it's exceptional, where you have to touch upon something very basic, like Log4j was just incredibly tricky to fix in some cases. But barring those exceptional situations, you do need to make sure that developers are on SLA. And that is where, and that also harps back to the ASPM, which can potentially integrate into our Jira systems, really track how tickets are progressing and make sure that we have an end-to-end view of it. I think that's probably the most important from my standpoint.
Thank you for making two interesting points. First of all, when I was a developer, well, it was my first job in high tech, but I wasn't even familiar with the term SLA. Never, like, obviously I wasn't even aware that this is something that we have an agreement on for every customer. So I think in a lot of cases, like, this is not even something that is in their state of mind. And the second thing that you mentioned, I feel it can be like, if I understood you correctly, you're talking about taking the vulnerability that has been represented in a specific tool and understanding like what are the real use cases that this can exposes you to. Because if you go even to a CISO in many cases, but obviously to someone that is not a part of the security team and tell them, yeah, we found this CVE, it has this CVSS score, it doesn't really tell them anything. You need to switch the language somehow to let them know to which attack behaviors this actually exposes you to. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. Thank you. I was so interested in what you're saying that I forgot to review the next question. But I think the next question is, I think something that I haven't seen a webinar or any, like, it's a buzzword that you cannot avoid in any show or webinar or event that you do. And of course, I'm speaking about AI. So Sean, this question is to you, and I see you already smiling. Can you share with me a little bit how does automation and maybe potentially AI can help you in the solution here for decoding application security reports and vulnerabilities?
Yeah, AI is going to take our jobs and solve everything, right? That's
Hopefully. If I
that's
will still get paid, I'm okay with it.
joking aside, I think one of the challenges that we've faced with AI is a lot of the marketing hype. It's given a really bad reputation where there is really good value in AI if used correctly and done correctly. And I think that's one of the problems that we face today is trying to figure that out. If we look at things like CVEs, and Jack alluded to this earlier, the number of CVEs is just, if you go look at the number, just I think it's CVE details, do a nice graph of this. Year on year, it's just growing and growing, growing and growing. Now, in order for teams to stay on top of this, manually doing it, it's just not going to scale. You're either going to have to hire loads and loads and loads of more people, which is probably not going to happen, or you're going to have to change the approach. And one way around this is automating things that, where applicable, can be automated and help. And then as part of that automation, hopefully leveraging things like AI to help with this. And I'm using the word help rather than solve this, because you're still going to need those humans involved. You're still going to need the help, especially the more tricky things. Where I view AI coming into it is helping with the more mundane, lower level type stuff, the stuff that's easy to reproduce and all of that kind of stuff. Don't ask me what it looks like. I've not seen a tool out there that's going to solve it all yet, but this is where I'm hoping the field will eventually get to, where we can have AI and automation dealing with the more mundane, boring stuff, and having the humans really focusing on the stuff that really needs the attention, needs the hands-on and that kind of thing. But today there are things for automation. So you got things like in GitHub with Dependabot that can raise automatic PRs. No AI involved there. But leveraging things like that will also then help alleviate some of the stress, some of the burden on teams. So again, so they can then go focus on the things where they will add more value rather than the more monotonous things. And similarly, this is where automation is again key. So if you're looking at like updating libraries and that, one of the things you want to have in place is all your automated testing. So if you do change something or have an automated process to change it, then you can make sure that it's the likelihood of it breaking something is lower than otherwise just going without any testing and visibility. But yeah, I think this is an area that's going to be interesting over the coming years, and seeing how the likes of AI and that are going to hopefully help. Again, ignoring all the marketing fluff around some of the stuff sometimes. But that's really where I see it, and I really view it as a tool to help us do our jobs better.
So I definitely agree, and you can already see a few areas when automation is. First of all, I just want to say that it's amazing, in my opinion, how concentrated you are with the two angels in the background that seems to do a lot, and we hear nothing of it. So that's amazing. So I do agree that we already see, like, it's not anything new, but opening pull requests or even automating the creation of Jira tickets or tickets in general. I'm not sure why I keep saying Jira when there's other ticketing systems out there. But I think, as you said, this is somehow limited, because even if we automatically open a PR, a developer still has to review the fix and make sure this doesn't affect the functionality of the application. And this is something that a lot of times that security teams are missing. Okay, you open the PR automatically, but what about the functionality of the code? Because someone still needs to review it and make those adoptions. So thank you. And my next question is to Ron. I mean, eventually, I assume all of us are based in here in Europe. And I want to ask you, what challenges do you foresee, especially when taking under consideration the law in the European Union, and when we're talking about decoding application security report, does prioritization alone help when we take under consideration EU legislation?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're looking basically and mainly at two different legislations that are now being discussed. NIS2, which will go live like these days, and then the Cyber Resilience Act. And I think when it comes to NIS2, of course, when you're providing software as a service and these things, then a lot of the risk-based approach still works. Yeah, because you're managing your own risk, you can make decisions, and you have to have a system in place that that proves your cyber resilience. And if you're not falling under NIS2, maybe you have that anyway because of the size cap. But their prioritization plays a big role, and it you need to have that insight and that contextualization to make the right decisions. It gets a little bit more difficult in my point of view when we talk about the Cyber Resilience Act, because then we talk about products that we deliver, and then it's not necessarily the amount of risk that you manage, but the amount of vulnerabilities. It's basically constantly talking about vulnerabilities. There's one part about the risk assessment, so you have to identify what your software, your product will be used in. But there's a current technical guideline from the Office of Information Security currently for proposal, which says when you talk about producing software that is vulnerability free, you cannot use the risk that you said before, basically to get yourself out of that, just saying, it's not risky or whatever. So you have to address vulnerabilities, and therefore the jump from what you said, Cam, from coming from vulnerability to risk gets more and more difficult. So it gets more into informing others how they can manage their risk using your products, depending what you're selling. And I think automation there helps a lot, because you are suddenly by law forced to evaluate the vulnerabilities in your software from your SBOMs, possibly with NVD or others, and then also create advisories. And that means the amount of advisories that we see nowadays will certainly skyrocket as well, because everybody is publishing them. And then the question is, how do you work with them? If you don't do that in a machine readable automated form with all the CSEF standardization, that's basically impossible. So you cannot read all CVEs, you cannot read all security advisories, and how do you match them to your environment? The same thing that we saw with SBOM in the past, and then matching it against the NVD or whatever you want to use, or your proprietary service. The other part is then you have to inform your your customers about how they might be affected, or if it's still in triaging. And there's also a lot of argument to be made to inform people about negative situations. I mean, we talked about Log4j, and the part doesn't matter really how much in the end the risk was, but it was a perceived risk. Yeah, there was a lot of panic in there, and I guess there's no company that wouldn't have been happy if they would have got the first day after it was published an information from all of their suppliers: we're not affected, we're not using Java, whatever. Yeah. So the thing is, like, we also have this negative parts, and there's where it comes together what I said before with this information. And Daniela, you said correctly, it doesn't help me when someone says you have a vulnerability with CVSS 10. I need to understand why is that. I need to understand how I can be affected, and that needs to be of high quality, because developers normally are not security expert, and I don't think they all need to be, and they'd not exploit experts. So the easier it is for them to identify if they're affected, I mean, by reachability analysis, what is there, or even like how the actual vulnerability works, that helps a lot, and that is key to then providing accurate information and fast information to customers. The other part is then with the part of fixing. Does prioritization help? Well, yes, to a certain degree, because it says it needs to be vulnerabilities need to be addressed and fixed in a reasonable time. And the reasonable time certainly is different for, let's say, a CVSS 10 and EPSS 10 than for anything that's low risk. But in the end, you have to fix. Yeah, at least that's what the current interpretation is. So, what is the lowest threshold not to act? And that's something that will be interesting how that plays out.
Well, thank you so much for this, Ron. I think we are 7 minutes out of time, so I'm sorry about that. So I just want to thank you all. I hope everyone who was here took some insights. I know that based on whatever Jack has said, I will be pitching in some ideas internally in OX, but I hope you got some meaningful insights with regards to what and how you should be reviewing your AppSec reports and findings, how you can turn this into meaningful actions, who and how you should be working with internally in your companies to prioritize this. So I want to thank again Sean, Ron, Cam, Jack. Thank you all for taking the time to participate today. Thank to whoever joined, and thank you, Lior and all, for setting up this great webinar. And that's it. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye for now.